The arena was electric with energy as thousands of fans poured into the grand stadium, eager to witness the reigning world champion boxer, Kade the Viper or Maddox, defend his title in what was expected to be a display of raw dominance. Kade, a man in his early 30s, had built a reputation as a savage in the ring, swift, ruthless, and backed by an ego as muscular as his biceps. He was the face of modern boxing, tattoos, endorsements, and a mouth that never stayed shut. But the buzz in the air tonight wasn't just about the title defense. A special guest had arrived, a living icon, Sylvester Stallone. No, not just as an actor, but as the embodiment of the underdog through his legendary character Rocky Balboa. Stallone's presence stirred something nostalgic in the crowd. While older fans looked on with admiration, Kade couldn't hide his disdain. Earlier that week, at a press conference, Kade had turned what was supposed to be fight talk into a personal roast session directed at Stallone. Rocky Balboa? That guy's a myth. He ain't never taken a real punch in his life. Kade scoffed into the mic, drawing laughter from his entourage but unease from the reporters. He didn't stop there. He mocked Stallone's voice, mimicking the slurred speech, and jabbed at his age, saying, "If Rocky walked in my gym, we'd call an ambulance before he got to the ring." The clip exploded across social media within hours. Some laughed, but many were outraged. This wasn't just a jab at an actor. It was an insult to an era, a symbol. Stallone didn't respond publicly. He didn't need to. His silence, as always, was more powerful than any tweet or interview. When the night of the fight arrived, Stallone entered the arena dressed in black, calm and composed, the very picture of controlled intensity. He wasn't here to confront anyone. He was here to watch, but the cameras couldn't stay off him. As he took his seat ringside, the audience stood up in waves to applaud him, chants of "Rocky! Rocky!" rippling through the crowd like thunder. Kade was still in the locker room, watching on the screen. "They're cheering for character," he spat, annoyed. His trainer looked at him and said, "Maybe. Or maybe they're cheering for what that character stands for." Kade rolled his eyes and went back to shadowboxing, but his rhythm was off. Something about Stallone's silent presence had gotten under his skin. The arena lights dimmed, music blasted, and out came Kade in a spectacle of pyrotechnics, LED screens, and a custom rap track blaring his name. He raised his fists, soaking in the adoration of his section of fans. But the moment was hollowed by the contrasting roar that erupted when Stallone's face flashed across the Jumbotron again. Kade noticed. Everyone noticed. As he stepped into the ring, he looked directly at Stallone and threw a mocking air punch in slow motion, then smirked like a boy showing off for the cameras. Stallone didn't flinch. His expression was stone, his eyes unreadable, but not unfeeling. He had lived this moment before in many ways. Not in the ring, but in life. The constant ridicule, the rejection, the struggle to be taken seriously, all wrapped into this familiar script playing out again. Kade's opponent, a rising star named Luis Navarro, waited calmly in the corner, but even he could feel that the fight had become secondary. The real tension was between two men, one a world champion with fists of fury, the other a living legend who had inspired generations without ever throwing a real punch. The ring announcer called out names, the referee gave instructions, and the crowd buzzed, but Kade couldn't resist one last jab. He turned towards Stallone, pointed his glove at him, and mouthed, "This is for you, Grandpa." The bell rang. Kade came out swinging, aggressive and wild, pouring out energy to prove a point. But the crowd wasn't fully with him. Half of them were still chanting "Rocky" with swelling voices. The camera panned to Stallone, who hadn't moved an inch. His hands were clasped, his jaw tight, his gaze fixed on the ring. It was like watching a man relive a battle from his past, not as Rocky, but as himself, Sylvester Stallone, the struggling writer who sold his dog to eat, who refused to sell his screenplay unless he could star in it, who fought every inch of the way to earn respect. Kade's performance in the first round was explosive, but sloppy. His focus was split. He looked over to Stallone every time he landed a big hit, trying to get a reaction. There was none, and that silence echoed louder than any punch. During the break, between rounds, Kade's corner tried to settle him down. "Focus on the fight, man, not the legend in the front row." But Kade couldn't help himself. He had built his image on dominance, and Stallone's silent presence was undermining that. Online, fans were turning. Tweets flooded timelines. Why is Kade so obsessed with Stallone? And Rocky lives rent-free in this dude's head. The commentary team, initially amused, started to question Kade's professionalism. One announcer said, "You can feel the energy like something bigger is at play tonight." Round 2 began, and Kade came out again, punching with fury, but his opponent was adapting. Luis Navarro was no slouch, and he was patient. Every time Kade wasted energy, showboating, Luis waited, calculated, chipped away. But still, the arena was louder for Stallone than either fighter. Then something shifted. At the end of round 2, Kade, chest heaving, walked past the ropes towards Stallone, stopping just a few feet away. "You still think I'm acting?" he shouted. Security rose slightly, but held off. Stallone slowly stood up. The crowd went dead quiet. It was like the world held its breath. Stallone looked Kade straight in the eyes and simply said, "The difference between us? I earned every cheer with heart. Let's see if you can." And then he sat back down. Kade froze. His smirk dropped. That one line hit harder than any punch ever could. The bell rang for round 3, but something had changed. In Kade's eyes, you could see doubt creeping in, and the audience could feel it. The next chapter wasn't just going to be about fists, it was about legacy. As round 3 began, the momentum had clearly shifted. Though Maddox was still physically dominant, there was a visible unraveling in his mental game. Stallone's single sentence, "The difference between us? I earned every cheer with heart. Let's see if you can," echoed in Kade's mind like a bell he couldn't unhear. He tried to shake it off, pacing in his corner and cracking his gloves together like thunderclaps, but his punches were no longer sharp, no longer precise. Across the ring, Luis Navarro sensed the hesitation and began to capitalize. Luis was methodical, a counter-striker who had studied hours of tape, knowing Kade's aggressive style would eventually open windows. The first few body shots Luis landed didn't just hurt physically, they stung Kade's pride. Normally, Kade would roar back, but now his rhythm was broken by the mental static Stallone's words had unleashed. He had entered the ring to silence a fictional legacy, but now found himself haunted by a real man who had nothing left to prove. The crowd could feel the shift. What had started as entertainment was now transforming into something else entirely. A live unraveling of ego and pressure under the brightest lights. Commentators shifted tones, saying things like, "You've got to wonder if Maddox underestimated more than just his opponent tonight." Fans who had once screamed Kade's name were now watching with folded arms, eyes darting back and forth between the ring and Stallone. The once jubilant undercurrent was now tense, expectant. Every time Kade glanced toward the front row, it was obvious. The man he had mocked was now inside his head, and he couldn't shake it. Luis took full advantage. A perfectly timed jab snapped Kade's head back. A slick dodge and uppercut combo drew a gasp from the crowd. Kade shook his head, as if trying to shake off a ghost, but it was clear he was slowing. He tried to rally with a flurry of punches, but they were wild, lacking precision. Luis absorbed and rolled with them, responding with a vicious hook that staggered the champion. Back in his corner between rounds, Kade was breathing heavier than usual. His trainer tried to speak, but Kade slapped the stool and shouted, "Why is everyone watching him instead of me?" His trainer didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Across the arena, Stallone remained calm, expressionless, eyes locked on the ring like a general watching a war unfold. Kade's fury was no longer aimed at Luis. It was aimed at a legend he couldn't knock down. Round 4 began, and Luis pressed forward, chipping away with disciplined combinations, avoiding brawls, and frustrating Kade even further. The crowd, sensing a possible upset, began to buzz with anticipation. They weren't just watching a boxing match anymore. They were watching a story unravel in real time. The same type of story Stallone had told decades ago on the silver screen, but now it was bleeding into reality. Kade lunged forward in desperation, throwing a brutal haymaker that missed by inches. Luis countered with a body shot that folded Kade momentarily. The crowd stood to their feet, and even the commentators began to shift their tone. "We may be seeing something historic here tonight," one said. Stallone remained seated, his hands folded now, a quiet nod his only reaction to the unfolding scene. It wasn't about revenge for him. It was about witnessing truth win out over bravado. In round 5, Kade finally landed a big shot, a left hook that staggered Luis, and for a moment he raised his gloves in triumph. But the crowd didn't erupt like it usually did. The cheers were half-hearted, scattered, almost reluctant. Kade noticed. He turned again towards Stallone, desperate now, yelling something inaudible over the noise. Stallone stood once more, and this time gave a small, respectful clap. Not for mockery, but perhaps for effort. But it only enraged Kade further. He screamed, "You don't get a clap for me." But even as he said it, there was a tremble in his voice, like a man who had lost control of a script he thought he was writing. Round 6 opened with Kade reckless, trying to reclaim the moment, but Luis kept his guard tight and countered with sharp, clinical strikes. A cut opened above Kade's eye. Blood trickled down, and he wiped it with his glove, stunned. For the first time in years, the great Kade Maddox was bleeding, and the crowd reacted not with horror, but with awe. They were witnessing a man pushed beyond his comfort zone. They were witnessing a fight that meant something more than a title. It was now about humility, heart, and redemption. Stallone's presence had transformed the fight without lifting a single finger. He had exposed what the ring really demands, not just strength but soul. Kade, now wobbly and furious, shouted toward the referee about elbows, low blows, anything, but there was nothing. Luis was clean, and Kade was crumbling. His ego was bruised, now more than his body. Between rounds, Stallone whispered something to the security guard next to him, who nodded and walked backstage. No one knew it yet, but something was being set in motion. Kade's corner was panicking now, pouring water over his head, cutting away loose tape. "He's not breaking," Kade growled. "Why isn't he breaking?" And still, the crowd kept chanting, not for Kade, not even for Luis, but for the idea of Rocky. That name had come to mean more than a character. It was grit, courage, endurance. Kade had mocked it. Now, he was being crushed by it. As round 7 began, a new figure appeared at ringside. Dressed in a simple gray hoodie and black sweatpants, someone stepped down from the backstage tunnel. At first, no one recognized him. But when the camera panned, the crowd lost their minds. It was Michael B. Jordan, the star of the Creed series, standing beside Stallone, a torchbearer of the Rocky legacy. The symbolism couldn't have been clearer. A new generation, side by side with the original. Kade saw it too. His eyes widened. This fight had never been just about fists. It was about legacy, and his was being overshadowed by legends both old and new. Luis landed another clean jab, then another. Kade swung wildly, missed, and stumbled forward. The crowd was standing again, cheering, but not for violence, for truth. Kade turned one last time towards Stallone, his face red with sweat and disbelief, and shouted, "You think he's better than me too?" Stallone slowly stood, and for the first time that night, spoke loud enough for the camera mic to catch it. "I think you're fighting the wrong opponent, kid." And in that moment, the entire arena fell into a stunned, deafening silence. It was no longer a boxing match. It was a reckoning. The final round had arrived, and with it came a tension that gripped the arena like a vice. No one moved, no one blinked as the bell rang with a hollow echo. Kade Maddox stood defiant in one corner, battered and drenched in sweat, his face a road map of bruises and determination, while Luis Navarro, younger and more agile, looked hungry for the final blow. The crowd had shifted. Once fully behind Luis, they were now conflicted, having witnessed a transformation in Kade that blurred the lines between underdog and legend. Sylvester Stallone leaned forward from ringside, his eyes narrowed, sensing something monumental about to unfold, while trainers barked commands and cameras zoomed in for the moment of truth. Kade's chest heaved, but there was something steely in his eyes, a calm amidst chaos, forged from years of discipline and pain. Luis opened with a barrage of punches, each blow sharp and vicious, forcing Kade onto the ropes, but the older fighter blocked and weaved with unexpected finesse. Then, like a ghost of his former self, Kade channeled a sudden burst of speed, ducked low, and delivered a body shot that staggered Luis for the first time in the match. The crowd gasped. Luis smirked, trying to shrug it off, but the hesitation in his footwork betrayed him. Sensing an opening, Kade stepped in with a brutal uppercut that snapped Luis's head back, a moment captured in perfect slow motion on every screen around the arena. A left hook followed, clean, surgical, that sent Luis spinning off balance, his gloves flailing. The roar of the audience began to swell, a tidal wave of disbelief and awe. Luis stumbled, tried to regroup, but Kade was already on him, a machine driven by decades of pain and perseverance. The older fighter unleashed a furious combination, each punch echoing with the weight of redemption. Jab, hook, cross, until finally, a devastating right landed flush on Luis's chin. Time stood still. Luis's body collapsed in slow motion, crashing to the canvas like a statue struck by lightning, arms limp, mouth open in silent shock. The referee dove in, counting swiftly as Maddox stood by in stunned stillness. Kade took a step back, breathing heavily, his gloves trembling at his sides. Silence rippled through the arena, disbelief washing over the crowd as they witnessed the impossible. Then, a deafening eruption. The stadium exploded in cheers as Stallone stood and clapped, his expression a mix of pride and wonder. The cameras panned across the audience, capturing grown men in tears, children screaming with joy, and commentators nearly speechless. Kade raised his gloves high, not with arrogance, but reverence, his gaze finding Stallone's. They exchanged a nod, a silent torch passing between two warriors who never stopped fighting. As the announcer declared the knockout, the arena vibrated with euphoria, with Luis slowly regaining consciousness on the mat and looking up at the man he once mocked. The moment was immortalized in 1,000 flashes, the story of a comeback no one saw coming, a myth reborn in flesh and blood. Social media lit up instantly, with the phrase "Stallone's spirit lives on" trending worldwide. News outlets scrambled to capture the miracle, dubbing the fight the echo of Rocky. In a locker room later, Kade removed his gloves slowly, staring at them with quiet disbelief, while reporters begged for interviews. But all he did was sit down, look at a photo of his younger self taped inside his bag, and smile. The victory wasn't just for him. It was for every doubter, every washed-up fighter, every voice that had ever told him it was too late. As the arena emptied and the janitors began sweeping confetti from the floor, a single quote played over the PA system. Stallone's voice from Rocky Balboa. "It ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward." And in that moment, every person who heard it believed it. And yet, the story didn't end there. Kade's victory sparked something across the sports world. Gym memberships surged. Young boxers began quoting Rocky lines before sparring sessions. Trainers pulled out old VHS tapes of Stallone's films for inspiration. Kade was invited to late-night shows, not to boast, but to speak about resilience. He became a symbol of comeback power, not just in the ring, but in life. People who had once written him off as a showman with a loud mouth now called him a champion with a lion's heart. He gave interviews where he said, "I found myself out there." The punches weren't just from Luis. They were from every mistake I ever made. And I punched back. Stallone, in a heartfelt tweet, wrote, "Proud doesn't even begin to cover it. That was more than a fight. That was a story worth telling." A month later, Kade walked into a youth center in Philadelphia, the same city that immortalized Rocky, and donated an entire gym to underprivileged kids, naming it the Creed Corner. Michael B. Jordan showed up to help him cut the ribbon. Cameras rolled, but Kade's speech was quiet, humble. "I mocked a man who built dreams. Then I realized I was living in one of his. It's time I helped build someone else's." The applause wasn't thunderous, but heartfelt. This wasn't about fame anymore. This was about legacy. Luis Navarro, in an interview later, admitted, "I didn't lose to an old man. I lost to a fighter who found his reason." Kade's story, from mockery to mastery, became a tale of modern mythology. A reminder that comebacks don't belong only in the movies. Sometimes, they walk into the ring and earn every cheer the hard way.